Welcome back. Oklahoma can boast some incredible women journalists. Linda Cavanaugh has become a household name all over our state. She was the first woman to co-anchor the news on KFOR back when it was WKY, and her talent and integrity have earned her more than a dozen Emmys, in addition to a mind-boggling number of other awards. She's been at Channel 4 since 1977 and has truly become a legend. As a matter of fact, our own producer of The Living Room credits her years working with Linda as the cornerstone of her own media career. Kelly Dyer Fry is a third-generation Oklahoma journalist. She has the distinction of being the first woman editor of the Oklahoman, and she also serves as vice president of news for the Opubco Communications Group. Kelly led the team that launched newsok.com, the most visited local news site in the state. This program you're listening to was recorded at the Opubco studio in Oklahoma City that Kelly helped bring into existence. I can't begin to tell you what fun it is to have you here.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
It is great. And is it a deal, we need to solve this right away, that we get a bus and we get on the road and we go to Ponca City to the Pioneer Woman Museum and see ourselves on display in a museum exhibit?
I'm in.
All right.
I just think that would be fun. I talked to another woman journalist, and I won't name her, and she said only if there are mimosas on the bus.
That's better.
Is that an incentive?
Yes.
Okay, it's getting better. There is so much to talk about as we look at our careers, and even though we're talking about TV, and in your case, Linda, and in mine, and print, in Kelly's case, the whole business of journalism has changed so much. And I want to go back to those early days. And would you agree, maybe both of you, that it was pretty much a man's world back then?
I absolutely would.
I think I would, but it never was a barrier. I never felt like it was a barrier to me here at the Oklahoman. But my first job, I have to say, was at the women's department at the Oklahoman. So there were divisions of coverage.
No such thing anymore as the women's division.
No, we don't have that anymore.
Well, Linda, you and I jumped into TV in the late 70s,
Right.
pretty much, and there was a real resistance to females in the newsroom, at least in my memory, back in Connecticut. But tell us a little bit about how you climbed that ladder.
Channel 4 was male-dominated simply because that's the way it was. Channel 4, WKY, was the first television station in this area, and it was populated primarily by men. But there were some females who were pioneers in their own right. One of the first females actually did the Bud Wilkinson show. She edited the tape and things like that. So totally out of place in what many would consider a man's world. And then Pam Henry was one of the first females. And Ernie Schultz, who was the news director, will tell you the story that they knew that this first female had to be very competent. And Bob Dotson, who's now with NBC News, met Pam, he says, at a story he was covering in Norman. And he said, here comes this woman, and she had polio, and she was on crutches, and yet she was carrying her gear, and she was determined to get to the front of this fire. And he said, that needs to be our first female. And she became the first female at Channel 4 as a reporter and a worker, and she was fabulous.
Oh, was fabulous.
Amazing work.
Of course, is featured in this exhibit at the Pioneer Woman Museum. Kelly, you had kind of newsprint in your blood, I have to say, from Word One, right?
I did. My family owns the newspaper in El Reno, and so my grandfather owned it, and then my father ran it until his death, and then my brothers are there, my sister's there. It's just kind of what we do. We don't really know how to do anything else. But my aunt was the first city editor of the Oklahoma City Times. So I was always familiar with women in the newsroom over here. So I don't think it jumped out to me as much because I always had known that she worked there.
And she's featured in
Yes,
the
she
museum
is.
exhibit too. That must be really fun for you.
It's very special. We're featured together. So I'm really excited about that.
Both of you, I think, can relate to this, that when we started, and I include myself in this, I was pretty much a one-woman band in terms of what I did, but also what I had to learn in order to make it in the business. Linda, was that true for you?
It was true, but I was very lucky because WKY was one of the first television stations. All of the pioneers were there who actually started television news. And so these were guys who allowed me to stand on their shoulders to learn what they had known. And so I kind of had an advanced course very quickly in how to be the best. And so I considered myself lucky. Was there resistance from some? Yes.
Yeah.
But from others, they were very helpful. I can remember when they talked about my starting to co-anchor the evening news. And the news director called me in. He said, well, we're going to try this experiment. We don't know that it's going to work. I said, okay. Because I had no aspirations to be a television anchor because there were none. I mean, Barbara Walters was the only one on television.
Absolutely. She was my role model.
So I didn't wake up thinking this is what I want to do for a lifetime. So I said, well, I'll try it. But I told my husband we need to start banking my paycheck. This may not work. And so we did. And it has worked.
But I bet both of you had to learn all phases of the business. In other words, in the TV sense, shooting, writing, editing. The anchoring was the icing on the cake.
Yeah. We were using film. And so I learned how to shoot film, learned how to edit it, learned how to write the packages, how to voice it, how to run the film up to the projector. And it was a different world because it took so long to get a breaking news story on the air that you had film of, because it would take an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes to get back to the station, get it in the processor, get it out of the processor, edit it, run it through the MagnaSync, which changed where the audio was on the film, and then run it up to the projector so that it would finally air. So it was a totally different world.
I remember everything was get the film in the processor.
That's right.
Or we don't have anything. What about in terms of those early days for you, Kelly?
Well, Linda said something that reminded me when you said they were going to do an experiment.
Yes.
Well, when we were going to start the web here at the Oklahoman,
Yeah.
They asked Sue Hale to start it, and they said, well, we'll fund you for 3 years and we'll see how it goes. You know, and so it was just another era of invention that we didn't know anything about. And when they asked me to come over and work with Sue, who's been my longtime mentor, of course I said sure, because I would work for her anytime. And we just started inventing and going along and making it up as we went along. So that was another experiment that worked out.
But in terms of even what it took to get a newspaper out in those early days versus now, it's entirely different.
Typewriters. I mean,
Yeah.
Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's in a word. It's typewriters.
Yeah.
you know, and wires and things like that. You know, so
I think all three of us have had, I know, bumps in the road along the way. And then on the other side of things, mountaintop moments along the way. So let's talk about the bumps first. When I think of it, I would there are detours in terms of career, but also the whole concept of balancing family life and as women, maybe guilt associated with time spent on a career versus family, mistakes, firings, convincing management of goals. Talk about a few bumps.
Gosh, truthfully, I wish I could make something up so it makes me sound good. But
Wow, you are one of a kind.
I don't know that that's the case, but I have a very supportive husband. And he teaches at the University of Oklahoma, so he would schedule his classes in the morning, and then I would work the afternoon and evening shift. So we never had babysitters. We never had to worry about childcare because one of us was always with them, so I felt no guilt.
That's great.
And then I specifically kept weekends free. I didn't take speaking engagements or appearances or things like that, just so that would be our time together as a family, because that Will and I just passed each other in the driveway often, you know, as we both went to our different jobs or came home. And I don't think my kids ever felt neglected. But I know that it's a dilemma that many families face.
Right.
Because we had a female reporter who was married to a police officer, and she was on call. And you know if an event is going to call out the police, she's going to be called out. And so they were left with the dilemma of how to find childcare in the middle of the night for 2 kids. So it can be a challenge, absolutely.
What about you, Kelly?
You know, nothing really comes to mind. I was a single mom for many, many, many
That's
years.
tough.
And that was very challenging, but the Oklahoman was always supportive of me, and I'd serve as a homeroom mom. I did things. I think I probably went overboard to try and overcompensate. If I did anything, that would be it. But I left here when my kids were little. I mean, I walked out that door at 5 o'clock. I became really good at time management.
Good for you.
But yeah, that could be a challenge.
You said something to me on the phone when we talked recently, and it wasn't in a negative way, but I thought it was very pertinent, that your entire career was climbing a hill. And I identify with that it was another layer of kind of breaking through to get to the next level.
Well, I think it was, I've always felt like I was swimming upstream because when in the early days of the internet, and I was trying to convince people, this isn't going away. We're going to lose classified advertising. And I could see what was coming, and it was like a train coming, but it was hard in the industry to imagine such a seismic shift in our business. And so just about the time the web was really hitting its full stride, that's when they asked me to go to the newsroom. And so then I get to the newsroom and I'm thinking, okay, well, this will be fun. I can focus on news and creative things, and I can involve the newsroom more in the online. And about that time, then that was 2007, 2008, and then the bottom started falling out in our industry.
Right.
And so there I was, we had a couple of rounds of layoffs. And so there I was again in a very challenging position. So I've never really gotten to skate.
No, that is the truth, because things change so quickly that you have to. The New York Times, when they owned us, came in once and said, things are going to change. If you can't change, we'll change you. So, it was pretty obvious that you had to be open-minded to all of these things that were happening. And now with the internet and with social media, television news is challenged to, sometimes we can't break the news first because it's on Twitter,
right,
or it's on someplace else. So our challenge now is to amplify the story and to somehow add meaning to it that you can't get on social media. So it's changed all along. I can remember the first time we had a satellite microwave truck, and the dilemma that we discussed in the newsroom, and I remember this to the day. We sent the truck out because a young man had died in a car accident and the car was underwater. And if you're covering it live, at what point do you quit covering it if they bring the car up and the young man's in it? I mean, you face all kinds of different ethical decisions as the industry evolves.
Let's go on to high moments, mountaintop moments, funny things. I can think of so many in my own career, but I want to hear from you. Linda, maybe in terms of things that you got to do, was the Soviet Union trip one of them?
The Soviet Union was a challenge because we were the first local television station allowed under glasnost to go in there. And it was a different world. We would discuss things in our hotel at night, and then they would come back the next morning, and it was obviously they had heard everything that we said, because we were complaining about not being able to go to this place or that place, and the next morning that's where we were lined up to go. Wow. So it was incredible. It was they would stand in line to buy bread. First they'd have to stand in line to be able to buy bread, then they'd have to go to another line to buy it, and then they'd go to another line to pay for it. It was just an eye-opening experience.
Other high points from either of you, or funny moments? You told me you told me many about Jack Ogle.
Jack is Kevin's dad, and Jack Ogle was the anchor when I was interning there, and they didn't have teleprompters, and he went into the bathroom prior to a show with his scripts in his hands, and they dropped in the urinal.
Oh, no.
Isn't that priceless?
Those kind of things happen. And so I think he was supposed to say some Japanese town, and it became Jonesville or something because he couldn't read it anymore. Great people.
One of my funny things, and you all can relate to this, is that I was going to go on camera, and I hadn't been on camera, but we started our partnership with News 9 in 2001, and they said, Kelly, we want you to come over and be on camera. Well, I just assumed that, because I always think I can just do anything. So I thought, well, that's not hard. I've seen Gerry do it. I've seen Linda do it. My eyes betrayed me. All of a sudden, while I'm trying to talk, my eyes kind of start doing this involuntary blinking, and I'm like, what's going on? And I just couldn't believe that I had this physical reaction to being on camera. And eventually I got used to it, but it shocked me. And I thought, wow, look at me.
It is a different world, isn't it?
It was really early in the morning, and I was thinking, I hope nobody's up.
And they find you.
Oh,
Well, we all have teleprompter stories anyway of when it dies and what you do. And, of course, there's that staring look lots of times, and you have to get over that. I remember the days when I worked my own teleprompter with my foot.
oh,
It was a
wow.
pedal. See?
That is funny.
And I mean, that's almost like what? Chewing gum and whatever,
Right.
I don't have that much
Right.
coordination as it is, so that was tough. Okay, let's talk just a tiny bit about the now of our business, since we, we do have to admit that we go back a long way, and I've probably the longest of the three of you. It's changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. One of my favorite interviews was with Edwin Newman, a journalist that is iconic. And I asked him the greatest problem in society, and he said it was the decline of good taste. But I often think that that's also a problem in journalism. But anyway, what do you think about then and now?
I think that television news saw a challenge when cable news came up, and you had these hundreds of television channels available now with this vacuum of time to fill. And so as they fill this vacuum of time, sometimes they are forced to make experts out of people who aren't necessarily experts, but
Absolutely.
who can be there and talk about something. The other challenge I see is accuracy and getting things right. If something appears wrong on Twitter, I mean, it's around the world
Right.
in a matter of seconds, literally. And trying to undo misinformation is virtually impossible.
Absolutely.
Because the harm has been done, the hurt has been done. And
And
I
you
find
never
that a
reach
challenge.
all the people
No.
to right the wrong. Anyway, Kelly, you
I
agree?
think it's credibility of journalism, of people being able to distinguish what is journalism and what is not. If I ask one of my children, if they'll say something, I'll say, "Where did you read that?" And they'll just say, "Online."
Right,
But
and they take it for
where-
fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where is so important. And so I feel like we're almost have to re-educate the people about, one, credible journalism, and two, about the role of journalism in democracy. I mean, people will sometimes very casually say, "Oh gosh, newspapers are going down," and they just say it as if it's not that big of a deal, like, "Oh, what are you going to do?" But the role we play in society is critical. It's critical to the health of our government and our society, and we just have to continually re-educate people on that importance, so they don't just, think everything is fact.
And people do you find that they're naturally drawn to emotional topics? And so you have various channels and various networks who specialize in fueling this emotion without necessarily providing both sides of the situation, which is what I miss. It used to be anytime we did a story, you had both sides on it.
We could
I
go
agree.
on, and guess what? We have no more time.
Oh,
so
no.
we need to do this again. It has been an absolute blast. I hope you both enjoyed it
I
too.
did.
Yes,
and
thank you.
I am committed to getting up to that museum exhibit and seeing it, and to getting to know both of you better. You are Oklahoma journalistic treasures, but treasures in your own right as women and colleagues.
Well,
And,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Our program is produced by Deborah Martin, and our engineer is Todd Frazier. Much appreciation to our announcer, Ken Bonds, and our website manager, Jeanette Thornbrew. If you have questions or comments for us, send them to thelivingroom@att.net. And you can hear all of our previous programs on our website at thelivingroomgb.com. We love hearing from you and hope you'll also like us on Facebook. I'm Gerry Bonds. Until next time in the living room, we borrow a line from another woman journalist, Linda Ellerby, who always ended her programs with a concise statement. Regardless of the story, Ellerby would say, "And so it goes." And so it goes for us as well. Bye, everybody.